hop yard, this contract is worthless, sweetheart. You don't even know what's in it. Dale Weston said it with a smile, which was the part that stayed with May Pickett longest afterward. Not the words, though the words were bad enough. The smile. The particular ease of a man who has decided the person across from him is not worth taking seriously. He was wrong on both counts. The contract was not worthless. And May Pickett knew exactly what was in it, because she had written it herself, word by word, 14 months before that conversation, at the kitchen table in the farmhouse her grandparents had built in 1948. With a legal pad and 3 different reference books open beside her coffee mug. But we're ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning, which is a hop yard in North Dakota, and a woman who had been dismissed one too many times. Part 1. The yard A&D, the woman Meridian Hops, which was May Pickett's operation, sat on 42 acres of cultivated ground outside of Wahpeton, North Dakota, and had been producing commercially for 8 years. Before the hops, it had been a row crop operation belonging to her parents, and before that, a mixed farm belonging to her grandparents, and before that, unbroken prairie that her great-grandfather had turned in 1911. The farmhouse, the barn, the machine shed, and the 2 hop houses May had built in her 6th year were all connected by a gravel lane that ran from the county road to the back fence. From the road in July, the hop yard was a wall of green, the vines climbing their strings to the tops of the 18-foot trellises, dense and fragrant in a way that stopped people who had never been near a hop yard in their lives. May was 58 years old. She had graduated from North Dakota State with a degree in agronomy, had spent 11 years as a paralegal for an agricultural law firm in Fargo before deciding she would rather grow things than litigate over them, and had come back to the family land at 39 with a plan. The plan had required 8 years of learning the hop industry from scratch, building market relationships she hadn't been born into, and tolerating the skepticism of neighbors who thought growing hops in North Dakota was a romantic mistake. She had done all of this without complaint, and had arrived at a position where Meridian Hops produced approximately 28,000 pounds of dried hops per year across 4 varieties, all contracted at prices well above the spot market. Her largest contract was with Pinnacle Craft Beverages, a regional brewery and beverage company based in Minneapolis that had been buying May's Cascade and Centennial varieties for 5 years. The contract had been renegotiated the previous year, and it was this renegotiation that had introduced Dale Weston into May's life, and, eventually, into this story. Dale Weston was Pinnacle's director of ingredient sourcing. He was 45 years old and had been in beverage industry procurement for 15 years, and had, in May's private assessment, a talent for making people feel like they had gotten a good deal when they had gotten a bad one. He was charming, in the way of men who use charm instrumentally. He was also, she had come to understand, operating on the assumption that a hop farmer in North Dakota would not read her own supply contract closely enough to catch the implications of Clause 14. He was operating on a bad assumption. Part 2. The contract negotiation, the renegotiation, had begun the previous January over 2 days of meetings in Minneapolis. Weston had brought a Pinnacle attorney named Birch and a procurement analyst whose name May never caught. May had brought herself and a yellow legal pad. The basic terms were straightforward. May would supply 12,000 pounds of Cascade hops and 8,000 pounds of Centennial per year for 3 years, at prices set to a formula tied to a regional hop price index with a guaranteed floor. The formula was one she had proposed, and Weston had accepted it with good grace, which should have made her more alert rather than less. What he had proposed in return, buried in the draft contract's boilerplate section on dispute resolution, was Clause 14. It read, in its original draft version, in the event of material breach by supplier, Pinnacle reserves the right to terminate this agreement and seek restitution of advance payments made under the contract. Supplier shall be liable for documented costs incurred by Pinnacle in securing substitute supply, including, but not limited to differential pricing, expedited sourcing fees, and administrative costs, to a maximum of 2 times the annual contract value. This was not unusual language for a supply contract. It was a liquidated damages clause, designed to compensate Pinnacle if May failed to deliver and they had to go to the spot market or another supplier at higher cost. May understood it and had no fundamental objection to it. What she objected to was the phrase material breach. Because in the draft as written, Clause 14 did not define what constituted a material breach, and Clause 2, which covered delivery specifications, contained a provision that Pinnacle could modify quality specifications with 30 days written notice. Read together. Clauses 2 and 14 created a mechanism by which Pinnacle could change the quality specifications on May's hops, declare that her delivery no longer met the modified specifications, claim material breach, and trigger Clause 14, thereby potentially recovering damages of up to 2 times the annual contract value from May for failing to meet standards she had not originally agreed to. 2 times annual contract value was approximately $190,000. May had spotted this reading on her third pass through the draft, at 11:30 on the first evening of negotiations, sitting in her hotel room with the contract and her agronomy textbook open on the same desk. She had written a 6-line note on her legal pad, clipped it to the relevant pages, and gone to sleep. The following morning, she had proposed 2 changes. First, a definition of material breach that explicitly excluded specification changes made after contract execution. And second, a modification to Clause 2 that required May's written agreement before any quality specification change could be applied to deliveries already under contract. Birch, the Pinnacle attorney, had agreed to both changes after a 20-minute break. Weston had not objected. The changes had gone into the final contract. May had noted and filed, and not forgotten, that Weston had not told her why he had originally proposed the clause the way he did. She did not know if it was deliberate. She suspected it was, because men like Weston generally knew what was in the contracts they drafted. But she did not know for certain, and so she decided to watch and wait. She did not have to wait long. Part 3. The summer of the contract, the growing season that followed the contract signing, was excellent. The North Dakota spring had been wet in April, which was concerning, and warm in May and June, which was not. The bines came on strong that year, climbing fast, and the yard was at full canopy by late June. May's field records showed consistent alpha acid development, the chemical measurement that determined hop quality for brewing purposes, running at or above target in weekly samples from mid-July through the end of August. She harvested in September, a 4-week process that involved a commercial harvester she leased from a neighboring operation, a drying crew she hired locally, and 3 weeks of intensive work that left her lean and tired but satisfied with the result. Final yield on Cascade came in at 12,600 pounds, slightly above the contract quantity, which was good, the excess going to spot market. Centennial came in at 8,100 pounds. She sent Pinnacle the harvest report and the quality certificates from the independent testing laboratory she used. Standard practice. Her contract required laboratory certification of alpha acid content and moisture level, and scheduled delivery for the first week of October. Then, on September 28th, she received a letter from Dale Weston. The letter stated that Pinnacle was exercising its right under Clause 2 of the supply contract to modify quality specifications. Effective immediately, Weston wrote, Pinnacle was raising the minimum alpha acid requirement for Cascade hops from 5.0% to 6.5%. May's latest laboratory report had shown her Cascade averaging 5.9% alpha acid, above the original minimum but below the new one. Weston's letter further noted that under Clause 14, Pinnacle reserved the right to declare material breach if delivery did not meet the modified specifications, and that in such event, the full damages provision would apply. May read the letter twice. She noted the date, September 28th, which was 2 days before the first scheduled delivery. She set the letter on the kitchen table. She called her attorney, Sandra Fitch, in Fargo. Part 4. Sandra Fitch was 61 years old and had been practicing agricultural contract law in Fargo for 33 years. She and May had met when May was a paralegal at the firm, and they had stayed in contact through May's transition to farming. When May had negotiated the Pinnacle contract, she had run the final draft past Sandra for review. Sandra had approved the changes May had made to clauses 2 and 14. May called Sandra at 8 in the morning on September 29th. Read me the modification notice, Sandra said. May read it. And read me the exact language of your clause 2 as amended, Sandra said. May read that too. There was a pause. He missed it, Sandra said. That's what I thought, May said. Or he's hoping you missed it. The amended Clause 2 requires your written agreement before any quality specification change can be applied to deliveries already under contract. Your September delivery was under contract when you signed it last January. He can't unilaterally change the specification and apply it to that delivery. And Clause 14, May said. Right, Sandra said. The amended Clause 14 excludes specification changes made after contract execution from the definition of material breach. Even if he argues the modification is valid, which it isn't, for the September delivery, he can't use it to trigger damages. May let out a long breath. There's more, Sandra said. The letter cites Clause 14's damages provision. That provision, as written, runs both ways. If Pinnacle tries to void the contract without valid grounds, they've breached it. And the liquidated damages cap of 2 times annual contract value applies to their breach as well. May had thought about this. She had thought about it carefully over the previous 12 hours. She had not been sure until Sandra confirmed it. 2 times annual contract value, May said. That's $190,000. Approximately, Sandra said. I'd want to calculate it precisely from the contract figures. But yes, if they void this contract without legal grounds, they owe you $190,000 in liquidated damages, plus whatever your actual losses are from having to find alternative buyers for 12,600 pounds of Cascade. There was a pause. How do you want to handle this? Sandra asked. I want to deliver the hops, May said. On schedule, as contracted, with full documentation, and I want a letter from you going to Pinnacle today stating that the specification modification is not applicable to the September delivery under the amended Clause 2, and that any attempt to declare material breach on this delivery will itself constitute breach of contract, triggering Clause 14 damages. That's exactly what I would recommend, Sandra said. Send it by noon, May said. I'll have it out by 10. Sandra said. Part 5. Delivery day. May drove to Minneapolis on October 3rd, the first scheduled delivery date, in her flatbed with the first lot of Cascade hops. 6,300 pounds in sealed bags, with documentation, harvest report, chain of custody, laboratory certificates, and a copy of the contract with clauses 2 and 14 highlighted and tabbed. She had not called ahead to tell Weston she was coming. She had sent delivery notification through the standard channel and email to the procurement coordinator, but she had not spoken to Weston directly since receiving his letter. Sandra's letter had gone to Pinnacle's legal department and to Weston's attention simultaneously, and Pinnacle's attorney had confirmed receipt but had not responded substantively. She backed the truck to the Pinnacle receiving dock at 10:30 in the morning and went inside to find the receiving manager, a man named Garrett, who had processed her deliveries for 4 years. "Got your Cascade," she said. He looked up from his terminal. He looked, not quite uncomfortable, but alert in a way that told her he had been told something about this delivery. "I'll need to check with Dale," he said. "Check with him," she said. He made a call. He spoke briefly and then handed the phone to May. "I think there's been a miscommunication," Weston said. He was using a careful tone. "The specification modification letter was not intended to affect the September delivery. It said effective immediately," May said. "I understand that. I'm clarifying that the intent was for future deliveries. That's not what the letter says," May said, "and my attorney has already sent you a letter explaining why the modification isn't applicable to this delivery regardless. I'm here to deliver 6,300 pounds of Cascade at 5.9% alpha acid, which meets the contract specification of 5.0% minimum. I have all documentation. Do you want to receive the delivery or not?" There was a pause. "We'll receive the delivery," Weston said. "Thank you," May said. She handed the phone back to Garrett. Garrett processed the delivery with careful professionalism. He pulled the laboratory certificates, matched them to the contract spec, noted the alpha acid figure, and signed the delivery receipt. May kept a copy. She loaded the empty pallets back onto the truck. She was pulling out of the parking lot when her phone rang. It was Sandra. "Pinnacle's attorney called," Sandra said. "They want to discuss a mutual modification to the contract. They'd like to bring the specification question to the table and renegotiate." "What did you tell them?" May said. "I told them that my client had just completed a compliant delivery under the existing contract and that any renegotiation would begin from that baseline. I also told them that my client would be happy to discuss contract modifications that were mutually beneficial and that any such discussion would need to address the circumstances surrounding the September 28th modification notice." "Good," May said. She was on the highway now, northbound, the truck empty and light. "There's one more thing," Sandra said. "They asked whether the $190,000 figure was on the table in any renegotiation." May was quiet for a moment. "Tell them," she said, "that it's not off the table. Either Part 6, the renegotiation meeting was held at Pinnacle's offices in Minneapolis on October 17th. May attended with Sandra. Pinnacle sent Weston, Birch, the contract attorney, and a senior vice president named Carolyn Hess, who had not been present in the original negotiation and who had, May suspected, been brought in to manage the situation that had developed. Carolyn Hess was direct. She opened by acknowledging that the September 28th modification notice had been inappropriate in its application to the current delivery, and that Pinnacle regretted any confusion. She did not call it a breach or a mistake. She used the word inappropriate with the precision of someone who has been coached on exactly how much to concede. May let Sandra handle the first hour of the discussion. Sandra was a skilled negotiator, calm, specific, unhurried. She walked through the contract language with the precision of someone who had spent 33 years doing this. And she made clear, without raising her voice, that Pinnacle's position had no legal basis. At the end of that first hour, Carolyn Hess excused herself from the room for 10 minutes. When she came back, she had a number. Pinnacle would offer an enhanced pricing schedule for the remaining 2 years of the contract. A $0 40 per pound premium over the existing formula, and would include a revised Clause 2 that required mutual agreement for any specification changes for the duration of the contract. May looked at Sandra. Sandra made a small note on her legal pad and pushed it across the table. The note said, 40 points, $20,000 LBS 2 years gull, $16,000, not close to $190K. But it closes the matter cleanly. May looked at Carolyn Hess. She said, that's a start. I'd also like a written acknowledgement for our files that the September 28th modification notice was not applicable to the October delivery and that the October delivery was compliant under the original contract terms. Hess looked at Birch. Birch gave a small nod. We can provide that, Hess said. May said, and I'd like the modification to Clause 2 to also require 60 days written notice for any specification change for future deliveries, with May's written acceptance required before the change takes effect. There was a brief conference at the Pinnacle side of the table. Then Birch said, we can accept that. May looked at Sandra again. Sandra wrote on the legal pad, that's better than $190K as a practical matter. You have protection for the remaining 2 years. Take it. May looked at Dale Weston, who had not spoken since the meeting began. He was looking at the table. She said, all right, we have a deal. Part 7. What Weston knew. They met in the hallway outside the conference room while the attorneys worked on the modification language. Weston and May, alone for the first time that day, standing by the elevator bank with the Minneapolis skyline gray and low through the windows. You knew what Clause 2 and 14 said, May said, not as an accusation. As a statement of fact. Weston looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. Did you think I didn't? I thought, he said, carefully, that most hop farmers don't read contracts the way you do. Most hop farmers, May said, didn't spend 11 years as a paralegal in an agricultural law firm. He absorbed this. I figured that out, he said, when Sandra Fitch's letter arrived. Good, May said. She was not particularly angry at him, and this surprised her a little. She had expected to be angrier. But anger requires energy, and the situation had been resolved, and what she felt more than anger was a kind of tired clarity. The clarity of having been tested and having held her ground, and knowing, now, that she had held it well. For future reference, she said, when you're negotiating with a farmer who proposes specific amendments to a liquidated damages clause, it's probably worth asking why. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Noted, he said. Also, she said, my Cascade is very good hops. 5.9 alpha acid is excellent for a Cascade variety in this latitude. You'd have been getting the better end of that deal, even at the original price. He looked at her. He said, I know. That's why I wanted to keep the contract. That was the most honest thing he had said to her in 14 months of dealings, and she gave him credit for it. The elevator arrived. He got in. She walked back toward the conference room where Sandra was working, her heels quiet on the office carpet, the hop yard 300 miles north, waiting for the next season's planting. Part 8. Back at the yard, she got home at 8 that night. She sat in her truck in the yard for a minute before going inside, the way she often did when she came back from something significant. Not delaying, but settling, giving the day time to become the past before she walked into the house. The hop yard was stripped for winter. The bines had come down in October, the strings cleared, the trellises standing bare in the dark. You couldn't tell, looking at it in November, that this was a productive yard. It was just wire and wood and dark ground. But the crowns were in the earth, alive, resting, waiting for the warmth of April to push them upward again. The hop plant does not die in winter. It retreats into its root system and waits. It has been doing this for a very long time. She thought about the legal pad on the kitchen table where she had drafted the contract amendments 14 months ago. She thought about the 11 years in Fargo, sitting across from farmers who had not read their contracts and were now paying for it, and the decision she had made to come back to the land and to bring every skill she had accumulated with her. She had not set out to be a paralegal turned hop farmer who caught a procurement director trying to trigger a fraudulent liquidated damages clause. She had set out to grow hops. But she was who she was, and the two things went together, and the result was that Meridian Hops would continue for at least 2 more years at a better price than it had started with. That seemed like enough. She went inside, made tea, and called her neighbor Doris to tell her the hops were delivered and the contract was settled and she was home safe. Doris said, "Were they awful?" May said, "They were trying to be. They didn't get to finish." Part 9. The season after. The following spring was dry in April, which was the opposite of the year before, and May worried about her bines in the way that farmers always worry. They have learned that the season has its own plans, and their plans are always provisional. But May brought rain, and the bines came on well, and by June the yard was climbing again. She walked the rows in the mornings, the way she had since the first year, checking the shoots and the crowns and the growth pattern of the strings. She knew her yard the way you know a living thing you have tended for a long time. By its rhythms, its signals, the particular shade of green that means healthy, and the different shade that means stress. She caught a spider mite problem in the east rows 2 weeks before it would have been a crisis, because she had been watching closely enough to see it early. The Pinnacle contract was current. The modification was in place. The first payment under the revised pricing had come through without incident, and the communication with Garrett in receiving was professional and smooth. Dale Weston had sent her a short email in the spring acknowledging the delivery schedule for the coming year. He did not mention the October meeting. She did not respond with anything beyond the standard confirmation. Sandra Fitch sent her a note in March, a handwritten one, which was Sandra's habit, that said, "Nice work. Clean outcome. Call me if anything comes up." May framed it and put it in the office where she kept her contracts and her records, on the wall beside the hop quality certificates and the first-year yield report that she had been almost afraid to look at 8 years ago, in case the numbers weren't good enough. The numbers now were good enough. They had been good enough for a while. Part 10. What the contract said, there is a version of the story in which May Pickett gets steamrolled by a procurement director who understands the contract better than she does. In that version, she signs the October modification without thinking, fails to deliver to the new specification, faces a damages claim she can't fight, and ends up settling for a fraction of what the contract was worth or losing the contract entirely. That version happens. It happens to farmers who don't read the documents they sign. Not because they are careless, but because there is always more to do than there is time to do it. And a contract renegotiation is the kind of task that gets pushed to the end of the day when you are already tired from everything else. It happens to people who trust that the party across the table means them well, which is not always an unreasonable thing to trust, but is also not always warranted. May Pickett read the contract at 11:30 at night in a hotel room because she had spent 11 years watching what happened when people didn't. She had amended 2 clauses. The amendments had taken 40 minutes to draft and 20 minutes to negotiate. They had, by the calculations Sandra made in her October note, saved May somewhere between $16,000 and $190,000, depending on how the situation had played out, and had preserved a contract worth approximately $285,000 over the remaining 2 years. The lesson was not that farmers need to be paralegals. The lesson was that the documents you sign have power over your life, and that power runs both ways. A contract that protects you is worth the same price as one that doesn't, the time it takes to read it. May Pickett had read it. That was all she had done, and it had been enough. Epilogue: she sold her first Cascade harvest under the revised contract in October of the following year. 12,400 pounds, 6.1% alpha acid, delivered to Pinnacle on schedule. Received without incident. Garrett was his usual precise self at the dock. The wire transfer arrived in her account 3 days later. She stood in the yard in the late afternoon and looked at the bare trellises against the November sky and thought about the vines that would climb them again in the spring. She thought about the contract in her office with its 2 amended clauses. She thought about Dale Weston in the hallway by the elevator, saying, "I know the hops are good." She thought about her grandfather, who had turned this ground in 1948 with a horse-drawn plow, and a decision to stay when leaving would have been easier, and she thought about the particular stubbornness that runs in families and manifests in different generations in different ways, as staying, or as reading, or as holding your ground in a Minneapolis conference room while an attorney and a vice president decide whether the contract means what it says. It means what it says. She went inside and made dinner and sat at the kitchen table where the legal pad was, and the contract reference books, and the yellow light of the single bulb over the table, and she was, for the first time in several weeks, simply at rest. Interlude. The legal pad. May kept the original legal pad. She kept it in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in her office, beneath the hop quality certificates and the year-end financial reports and the correspondence file. It was a standard yellow pad, college-ruled, about a third used. The first 12 pages were notes from the original contract negotiation. Her questions, her proposed amendments, the logic she had worked through in the hotel room. The amendments to clauses 2 and 14 were on page 7, written in her careful, slightly angular handwriting, underlined twice. She was not a sentimental person as a rule. She did not keep things for their emotional resonance. She kept the pad because it was a record, and because records mattered, but she would be dishonest if she said there was nothing personal in keeping it. She had been a paralegal for 11 years. In that time, she had sat across from a lot of farmers, good farmers, careful farmers, people who understood their land better than they understood the documents that govern their relationship to the world beyond it. She had drafted contracts for them and reviewed contracts for them, and, too often, explained to them what the contract they had signed the previous year actually said, which was not always what they had expected it to say. She had come back to the land, partly because she wanted to grow things, but partly because she had decided that someone who understood both the growing and the documents was exactly the kind of farmer the system was designed to disadvantage, and she wanted to see what happened when that person didn't play along with the disadvantage. She had found out. She filed the legal pad back in its drawer and went to check on the east row, where the spider mites she had caught early were responding well to the miticide she had applied 3 days ago. Interlude. The harvest crew, May's harvest crew, was 4 people. Herself, her niece Tara, who drove up from Fargo for the 4 weeks of harvest every year. A local man named Garrett Peel, who was reliable and knew the hop harvester, and an older woman named Bea Hollins, who had been helping with harvest since the 3rd year, and who was, in May's estimate, worth 2 of most people when it came to stripping and sorting. Tara was 29 and in graduate school for environmental policy, which she said had very little to do with hop farming, and which May had told her was not accurate. Tara had read the contract amendments when May showed them to her the previous October and had said, "You know what this is? This is you using 11 years of legal work to protect 11 years of farm work." May had said that was about right. Tara had said she was going to tell that story for the rest of her life, and May had told her to go ahead. The harvest crew worked from 7 in the morning until the light gave out. The first week was always the hardest, the muscle memory not fully restored, the body not yet adjusted to the pace. By the second week they had found their rhythm, and the yard moved steadily through the harvester and the drying kiln and the baling press. May walked every row before the harvester went through. She was looking for anything the weekly checks might have missed: disease pressure, uneven ripening, late-season pest damage. She carried a clipboard with the field map and made notes in the margins. The notes were small and specific. Row 14 east, slight downy mildew, mark for fall cleanup. Row 22, crown looks soft at base, check irrigation. This was how she farmed, close, careful, and written down. Bea Hollins watched her do this one morning and said, "You know, most growers just run the harvester through and see what comes out." Most growers, May said, also get surprises they didn't want. Bea said, "That's a fair point. The harvest that year was, by any measure, a good one. 12,400 pounds of Cascade, clean and dry, with alpha acid running consistently above the contract minimum. 8,100 pounds of Centennial, slightly above the contracted quantity, the excess going to spot market, where the price was running better than it had the year before." She filled out the delivery paperwork herself. She had always filled it out herself, because mistakes in delivery paperwork were the kind of thing that created friction with buyers, and she did not like friction. The lot numbers, the weight tickets, the laboratory certificates, the chain of custody documentation, all of it cross-referenced and clean. Tara said, on the last night of harvest, sitting at the kitchen table with a beer, "Do you think Weston ever actually thought it would work?" May considered this. "I think he thought it had a good chance of working," she said. "He probably does it to smaller suppliers, and it goes fine, because they either don't catch it or they don't have the standing to fight it. He probably thought I was a farmer and wouldn't push back." "Were you angry?" "Not as much as I expected to be," May said. "More tired of it. Tired of the assumption." Tara was quiet. "Then, is that why you left the law firm? Because you were tired of watching it happen to other people?" May was quiet for a moment. "Partly," she said. "I also just wanted to grow things." Tara nodded. "You do both now." "Yes," May said. "I do both now." Interlude. Dale Weston. 3 months later, she heard from Sandra in January. A brief call, practical. Pinnacle had apparently hired a new contract attorney. one who had flagged several of their standard supply agreements as carrying the same structural ambiguity that had been resolved in May's renegotiation. Pinnacle was conducting an internal review. May said, "Is this going to be a problem for us?" Sandra said, "No. Your contract is the already corrected version. If anything, you're their proof of concept." May said, "What happened to Weston?" Sandra said, "He's still there, as far as I know. Different role." May said, "All right." She had no particular feeling about this, one way or another. She had not set out to change Pinnacle's internal structure or end Dale Weston's career. She had set out to deliver her hops at the agreed price under the agreed terms, and she had done that. What happened at Pinnacle was Pinnacle's business. What happened in the hop yard was hers. She went back to the winter maintenance list, the trellises she wanted to reinforce before spring, the irrigation line in the north section that had shown a slow leak in the fall, the crown tissue samples she needed to send to the extension lab before March. There was always more to do than there was time to do it. That was farming. That was most things worth doing. She was not planning anything dramatic for the coming year. She was planning to grow hops, and to read her contracts, and to deliver what she promised at the quality she promised, and to rest when the season allowed resting. That seemed like exactly enough. Interlude. The hop house at night there was a particular pleasure May had not expected when she built the two hop houses. The drying kilns where the freshly harvested bines moved through on conveyor belts. The warm air pulling the moisture down from the cones, concentrating the lupulin and the oils that made the hops fragrant and bitter and useful. At night, during harvest, the hop houses ran around the clock. You could smell them from the farmhouse, a deep, resinous, almost piney smell layered over something earthier. It was one of the most distinctive smells in agriculture and one of the least known, because most people encountered hops only at the end of their journey, dissolved into a glass of beer and no longer smelling of themselves. She went out at 10 o'clock one night during the second week of harvest, when Tara and Garrett and Bee had all gone home, and stood outside the hop house and listened to the fans and the conveyor and the hum of the dryer. The smell was very strong. The stars were very bright. The temperature had dropped into the 40s, which was cool enough that she wore her heavy jacket and her hat. She stood there for a while, not thinking about anything in particular. Not the contract, not the delivery schedule, not the spider mites in the East Row, not Dale Weston. Just the smell and the sound and the stars. This was why she had come back. Not the legal knowledge, not the contracts, not the satisfaction of catching a clause. Those were tools. This, the yard in the dark, the smell of a good harvest, the knowledge that the work had been done and the crop was in, this was the reason. She went back inside after a while and went to bed and slept deeply, the way you sleep when your body has earned it. If this story spoke to you, the satisfaction of knowing your business, knowing your documents, knowing the ground you stand on well enough that no one can move you off it, subscribe and hit the like button, because we tell these stories every week. We have the story of an old dairy farmer in Wisconsin whose herd turned out to be worth 4 times what a co-op manager thought. We have the story of a 76-year-old man in South Dakota whose water right from 1887 stopped a land speculator cold. We have a whole country full of people who knew more than they were given credit for, and the days when that knowledge mattered. Leave a comment telling us about a time you read something carefully that someone assumed you wouldn't, or a time you wish you had. Both kinds of stories belong here. We'll see you next time.